So you want a water bucket, a watercolor set. We'll use those in a little bit. Black, if you have other markers, you can use other markers, but if you just have black, that's fine too. But you do want to have some sort of marker, Crayola marker, and then a paintbrush. And it would be helpful to also have a paper towel. Now with your watercolor paper, go ahead and tape down all of the sides onto a hard surface, and then go ahead and divide that paper into 2 sections. If you wanted to, you could divide it into more than 2 sections, but for us, we're going to just divide it into 2 sections. Since we are being artists, I want to experiment with this paper. Right? One of the experiments I want to do is how I can get marker onto that transparency paper and then onto the actual paper, the watercolor paper itself. So what could I do? Shoot out some ideas. How can I get marker on this transparency, then onto my watercolor paper? What should we try?
Putting marker on the transparency paper and then putting it over the watercolor and it.
And then getting it, how are we going to get it to come off? Or let's just try it. Let's try. Go ahead and draw an image or something in this area, and then we're going to try and press it on and see if some of it comes off. And remember, your design can be anything you want. In my situation, I'll go ahead and do a face. I'll just put a spot where the eyes would be, maybe underneath the nose, maybe where the mouth would be. And then maybe there'll be some shading where eyebrows might be. Maybe underneath the chin. You know what? I'm going to use multiple colors too. If you only have black, you could just use black. If you have other colors, you can use other colors too. So maybe I'll do some where the eyes are. Maybe I should try some yellow. Yellow face, what? Okay, so I'm going to experiment. I drew something, and press it down, and I pull it up. Oh, okay, so that did some stuff. It got some of the image there. How could we get more of this marker onto our paper? Let's try another experiment. Ash?
Maybe add water?
Add water. Awesome. So onto your paper, go ahead and add water. I'm not going to tell you how to add water to this, but just add water somehow. I want to see what different people come up with. Ooh, that's a good idea. Part of being an artist is experimenting and trying different methods. If I told everyone exactly what to do or how to get water onto this image, our images would be very, very closely to the same. So I'll just go over some of the examples I see some of you doing. Some of you are using your paintbrush to get water onto your brush and then to put it onto your paper. I saw someone else using a paper towel, dipping it in and then wringing it out onto the image itself. Saw another person dipping their hands in and then just dripping some water onto the paper itself. So maybe you're doing a combination of both. Maybe you drip the water on and then you're kind of like moving it around with your hand or with a brush. I think there's plenty of water on here though. I don't think it has to cover it. Maybe yours is completely covered. Maybe you have just a little bit of water. But let's see what happens. Go ahead and press this down. If I press it lightly, it's going to create one effect on my paper. If I smear it, it's going to make another effect. You know what? Press around. I could also, instead of just, if I pulled it up right here, it looks like one thing. If I press it and then drag it, it could do another thing. I could rotate my image and then press it down again. Right? So if I rotated my image, now you'll notice like on this left side, some of it's more defined, some of it's got like just random dots kind of looking thing. On the right, you see a little bit more details. You see some of that chin that's now on the top of the head. I could continue rotating this. Right? Just different effects. So it didn't create the image necessarily like I wanted. But that's okay. It's all about experimenting. I'm going to go ahead and dry off my transparency paper. Go ahead and dry off yours now. Alright, so like this dog right here, I started off doing experiments like this. And then I got like different effects where it kind of showed up. But you'll notice I have like ink right here for the eyes and nose. We also have these little areas there. We have some where it's painted on. So now what I want to do is on this right side, I'm going to do another experiment. I'm going to draw, you could draw the same thing, you could draw something different. I think maybe I'll do something different. On this one, maybe I'll do like a rose. But anyway, go ahead and draw something on this for this right side. We're going to do another experiment. I don't know if this is a rose. This is kind of just like something. Looks like a flower of some sort. If I wanted, I could use other colors too. So maybe I'll just use some blue. Now I know if I add a whole bunch of water to this, it's just going to smear it. You won't see the image. Add some yellow in the background. Oh, what a cute little rose flower, rose thing, flower with the tree leaf. Okay, for this experiment, I'm going to go ahead and put this to the side for a second. This time, I want to make my paper damp, not soaking wet, because I know if it gets soaking wet, I might get something similar to what I did in my first experiment. So this one, I'm going to get my paper damp. So I'm just adding some water. If you have a flat brush, it's a little easier to do this with a flat brush. But if not, it's okay. Still just adding water. All right, so I added quite a bit of water, but now I'm going to just spread it all the way across vertically and then horizontally. You say, wow, Mr. Schaefer, that was way too much. You're probably right. So I'm going to use a paper towel and just kind of wipe off some of that moisture. All right, so if I look at an angle, I see some shine on it, but it's not like soaking wet. Some areas are a little wetter than others. Now I'm going to press my image down on it. If I press really hard, it spreads. If I leave it just barely pressed lightly, it won't spread as much. Then I lift that up. Whoop. There we go. So mine was a little wetter, but it's got this cool effect. As I'm doing this, I'm also taking notes. You might literally write down some notes. You might just like take a mental note like, oh, I really like it when this happens. So like maybe I really like it how I pulled it off to the left and it kind of created these streaks to the left. If I like that effect, I'll take a note of it. All right, so that was a fun experiment. Maybe I'll also experiment. There's some moisture still on here. So I'm going to just use this flower one, press it on this right side, see how that looks. Maybe it looks cool. Maybe it does not. Yeah, it does not. Does not look very cool. And that's okay. These aren't going to all look cool. We're experimenting. So I'm going to add some moisture to my paper, my plastic paper, and then wipe it off. All right, on this left side, it is now dry. So on this left side, I want you to experiment with drawing something with marker and then using your paintbrush with just water in it, just a little bit of water, to mix it around, to do something else. So maybe I'll do a shape. I'll do a cube. Now I'm going to say the light's coming from up top to the on the right-ish. So this one I added a little bit of marker. Now with my brush, I'm going to paint over that marker. In fact, when I paint, I'm going to go right up to those edges so that I get a sharper edge. What we're really doing is just experimenting what is happening when I do this. What happened to my drawing? It kind of disappears. What happens to the paint itself? It kind of like comes into my brush. So I could technically use that same brush and paint that design to the right. Maybe dip it in water, mix that in, so now I've got a lighter look on the right side. when the right side touches the left side, it bleeds over into it, right? So maybe I would want to do layers. Maybe I could use my paper towel to kind of dry up some of that. It still looks a little darker on this right than the left side. You know what else I'm going to experiment with? On this left side where I've used marker, I'm going to experiment with getting, let's say, this sky blue looking color. And experiment with adding some of that in here. I'm not going to add it to all of it. But notice what that does. It creates another sort of effect. And this is pretty wet. So we'll notice as it starts to dry that the pigment kind of comes to the edges. Right? So maybe I like that sort of effect. If I was doing a rose on this side, it's dry now. So if I was doing a rose on this side, maybe I'd do some of the petals looking like this. In fact, I'm going to. Right now, I'll do a petal right here. Now I don't want them to touch because I see what happens there. They bleed into each other, so I'll have to do some petals that are separated. And I don't know where all these petals are going to go, but just kind of guesstimate. So in your drawings or your paintings, whatever you want to call this, I would say painting, go ahead and experiment. Keep experimenting with what happens when you do marker and then paint on top of it. What happens when you do different colors of marker? Maybe add some extra water in these sections. Now maybe yours looks really ugly. That's okay. We're experimenting. If you don't learn anything from this experimenting, then that's not good. But if you're learning something like, oh, here's a certain effect I can create by adding marker around it and then afterwards drying with paint or with water. I zoomed in so you can see a little bit better of what I'm doing. So I'm going to use my brush again, this time keeping it really light because I don't want it to look like a marker necessarily. Go over some of this area that I drew in. Now I could add watercolor to it too, if I wanted. Still a little bit wet on this left side, but let's say I want to add some yellow watercolor. Add some yellow inside my palette. Mix a little water in there. And maybe I'll go over this area right in here. Just lightening that up a little bit. Rinse out my brush. Do a little bit in here too, up top. You know what? I want it to be a lot lighter on the top of this cube. So I'm going to go ahead and go over this with water. It has a little bit of yellow in there. And I'm going to dry it up. Alright. Gives the cube a little bit more depth. Maybe I also want to add watercolor to the outside edge. In fact, maybe I'll use purple with a little bit of yellow to make like a brownish looking color. You'll go around the edges, just barely touching that marker to revitalize the paint. Just move that around a little bit. That way I'm creating the edge of something. Rather than having an exact line, all I'm doing is defining the edge, making it pop out a little bit. I don't want to do it on this left side yet because this left side is still a little bit damp. But I could. Another cool effect that you can do when you're trying to do something like this with marker and whatnot, you can have little areas, I don't know where to put it right now, but let's say right here, we're creating a shadow. I can have areas where it's a little bit stronger. And go over it with more water and more paint until it's just like crazy amounts. It's just like drippy, drippy wet. Then if I let that dry just like that, it will end up creating some darker shadows on the outside edge. It kind of pulls the pigment to the outer edge, and it'll be a little bit lighter in the inside. Kind of similar to what's happening here with this rose. All right, so what I want you to do is keep experimenting, try out different things, use markers, try and actually make something based off of what your initial art ideas are. Hopefully this leads to some actual art making where it's relating to your ideas. But if not, you're experimenting and getting to know this type of media a little bit better. In just a little bit, we'll show what you guys are making so that it can spawn some more ideas. So maybe with pink, I'll go around, do some more edges. Maybe instead of just using water, I'll use a little bit of purple and red in my paint. These little sections, I'm adding a little bit more red. Another thing I like, and I'm just taking note of it in my mind, is I like it when I see some of the white showing through. That unfinished look kind of looks good with this, the watercolor technique really showing through. Right? I also am noticing, oh, this is kind of fun when I use like a different color and it's dry. Kind of creates these harsher edges. Maybe I like those harsher edges. I kind of like that harsher edge on this side. Maybe I do certain techniques and then add like some painting to the other side, so it's going to be a lot lighter, almost as if it's out in the distance, just mimicking kind of what's already going on. Am I painting on the left side? So maybe there'll be some areas where I do something like that. If I want to strengthen it, maybe I'll just dip a little bit more pigment and water in. That will give me some more a little bit harsher edges, but still have that good design. Good. I like how it's turning out. Keep continuing on this and then experimenting. I see a lot of different images that you guys are making, and that's good. Experiment. Make sure you have your name on your paper somewhere, so that when we turn these in, I can see that you experimented and that you tried multiple techniques. This would be one technique. Having the paper wet beforehand and then pressing it down, that's another technique. Having the transparency wet and then putting it down, that's a technique. Looking at experimenting with creating edges and creating some spaces where it gets darker on the outer edge, that's another technique. Using marker, I should see some marker experimenting. Maybe you have some where you're doing outer edges and you're doing like marker where it goes from light to dark, or you add concentrated paint in those areas. I'll show you one. I kind of showed you this earlier. So like this, I use the same technique. I used the marker for this outer edge, and then I used larger sections of just watercolor to make different areas kind of stand out. Then when I was all done and I liked the colors, then I used ink, India ink, to paint in some of these really strong highlights. Because people normally look at eyes, and so, for example, that's where I spent a little bit more time using an ink pen and India ink. These are just our experiments. We've brainstormed. Next time, we'll start painting. When you get to the actual painting, you can take any image that you find online, or if you have an image, and then you can basically color over the different areas of that image to mimic it onto your paper. The only thing is, when you do this, it will create a reverse of that image, so it'll be like the opposite direction. I would also suggest with using darker colors that you only add the darker colors in those areas that just don't add a ton of dark colors. You want to add a little bit, but not too much. Also, you can change the image so you see that I'm drawing over that hand, because I don't want to include those weird hands on top of that person's head. I just want to include the hand below the person's head, and like some of the details in the face. So anyway, I'll speed this up, and this is just an example of using an image to create this idea of transferring an image onto watercolor paper.